Lies. We've all told them. And if you say you haven't, that's a lie. But what about game companies? Because if you just tell a lie, yeah, you, watching, someone finds out and then the truth will eventually come out, but, you know, it's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. If a company lies about a product they are trying to sell to you, though, then that becomes really bad. So that's what we're counting down today. Now, to make this list, I narrowed it down to times where companies outright said something that ended up not being true. I know there are a lot of misleading trailers for games like maybe Dead Island, you know, or times where you get an E3 demo that is just nothing like how the game ends up being. But if I include those, that would probably make up the entire list. I could do that in the future if you guys want, though. But this is specifically lies that game companies outright said, you know. So without further ado, let's get into this. Hi guys, MiiKcast here, counting down today the top 10 biggest lies from game companies. Now before we get started, you know what to do. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell, leave a comment, or I'm never being honest with you again.
I wanted to give to you, in the last part of your notes here, the significance spiritually of the number 10 in the Bible.
Microsoft. We'll see them later, but this gen has been odd for them. I feel like they didn't put out any new games worth a note on the Xbox Series till 2023, and two of the games they put out were Hi-Fi Rush, developed by Tango Gameworks, and Redfall, developed by Arcane Austin. Hi-Fi Rush came out, and despite being announced and shadow dropped on the same day with zero marketing, it ended up being a hit with critics and players, along with being successful overall. Redfall, on the other hand, was quite the opposite. However, I bring this up because Microsoft stated that despite the failure of Redfall, they were not going to shut down Arcane Austin, and as for Hi-Fi Rush, they also stated that they were planning on investing more into Tango Gameworks and the Hi-Fi Rush IP, and they eventually went on to close both studios. Now, to be fair, I feel like Microsoft might have been telling the truth at one point, but the gaming industry is, you know, the gaming industry, so things changed. But to say that you are planning on investing more into Tango just to shut them down, I'm sorry, but that's a fucking flat out lie. Luckily for Tango, Krafton of all publishers came in and proved that miracles do exist as they bought the company from Microsoft at the last minute. So it's a happy ending for Tango, but not so much Arcane Austin. Remember, like, not that long ago at the beginning of the video where I said that I'm not including any gameplay footage that ends up not being like the game's final product because that will just make up the entire list? Well, I'm still sticking to that, but in the case of Watch Dogs, it showed some really impressive looking gameplay footage at E3, but most people understood that, you know, yeah, this wasn't the final game, and it's not what it was going to look like, because that usually happens anyways, even the good ones. And if it was left at that, there probably wouldn't have been a controversy. The problem arises, though, when Ubisoft comes out and says that the footage of the game shown at E3 is what Watch Dogs will be like when it comes out. And when you say that, now there's an expectation. So, yeah, it wasn't like that at all. Many details seen in the trailers, much like the weather effects or whatnot, were just not in the final release. Other than that, many areas just looked unfinished or glitchy, and simply put, Watch Dogs wasn't the next-gen title that Ubisoft was championing. May be hard to believe now, but back in 2016, Overwatch was the fucking shit. We're all sick of the online multiplayer hero shooters now, but back then, Overwatch delivered something relatively new. Fast forward to 2024, and all Overwatch is just a somewhat sequel filled with broken promises. Now, to be fair, kind of like Microsoft and Tango and Arcane Austin, this doesn't quite seem so much like a company lying as much as it is things changing, or in this case, things getting cancelled. But the things that got cancelled were the whole reason for Overwatch 2 to exist in the first place, so I think it needs to be on here. There are many reasons why Overwatch 2 has not been sitting well with players, but the one major lie is the promise of a campaign mode, set to be a story-driven mode of the game that would be a bit of a break from the usual multiplayer content from the game, and due to the cast of interesting and fun characters, people were excited for this, and it would set Overwatch 2 apart from Overwatch 1. However, due to a change of release internally, Overwatch 2 would release without the campaign mode, but it was promised later on, which was a fucking lie, as it was cancelled, leaving many players to question what is even the point of Overwatch 2 now.
36.
Very close, but that's not it. Let's go to Gary the Retard. What number between 2 and 4?
7.
EA. If I really wanted to, I could have made this entire list about EA lies. It's in the game. But there is one, maybe two, but for now, one in particular I want to talk about, as one of their biggest franchises, without question, has to be Battlefield. And when Battlefield 3 was coming out, there was excitement, but it seems like people naturally are a little hesitant to pre-order games, especially from EA. So EA announced that as a pre-order bonus, not only would you be getting Battlefield 3 at launch, but you'd also be getting an additional game, Battlefield 1943, at no extra cost. This almost sounded too good to be true. And it was. When people who pre-ordered Battlefield 3 received their copy of the game, there was no Battlefield 1943. No disc, no download code, not even like any instructions on how to get it. Nothing. It turned out to be a massive lie. This got so big that fans threatened legal action against EA, but the company eventually caved in and gave players Battlefield 1943 for free like they originally promised.
Okay, Mrs. Puff, what's my final score?
6.
Woo! So I'm not gonna say whether or not this is fair, but when you think of one of the biggest liars in the gaming industry, not the biggest, but one of the biggest, I feel like Todd Howard comes to mind, and that is probably because of Fallout 76. Pretty much, Todd Howard, and by extension, Bethesda as a whole, promised that Fallout 76 would be a fully fledged Bethesda game with a massive and detailed world, spawning this now infamous clip.
It allows us to have 16 times the detail.
The problem is, that ended up not being true. And sure, you can just say it's not as detailed as promised because the game is unfinished, but talking about the world itself, it's much emptier and more bland than what was originally promised. But that wasn't all for Fallout 76, as another infamous lie came with the Collector's Edition, where players were promised a nice Fallout-themed canvas bag but ended up with a shitty nylon bag. And in case you don't know, I'll just say a nylon bag is a very cheap kind of bag. This did a lot of damage to Bethesda, to Todd Howard, and took a little while to come back from.
Oh, chills. Literal chills.
It was number 5. Number 5 killed my brother.
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
EA are back. Again, this list could have just been lies from them, but we gotta look at Mass Effect 3. Despite the ending of the third game that I'm about to talk about, I personally believe that with time, Mass Effect has gone down as one of the greatest trilogies in video game history, as they told stories unlike ones we've ever seen in games, and the way each game connects to one another, and the many different story options that can develop as you play, all resonated with people. When the third game was coming out, the developers were stating just how good the ending was. More specifically, they literally said, "This won't be an A, B, or C conclusion. Your choices matter." Like, that's pretty much a quote. And many players ended up buying that, which ended up being false. The ending of the game, and by extension the whole trilogy, was exactly what they said it wasn't going to be. No matter what in-game choice you made, the ending was the same, with some very minute differences that aren't even worth mentioning. And on top of that, the ending itself, in terms of its writing, ended up being its own controversy. This got to the point where EA would then change the ending. EA, man. Cyberpunk 2077. Oh boy. It's amazing to me that a game with a launch this rocky was able to bounce back. But even though I really enjoyed it when it first came out, many people noticed that a lot of the things CD Projekt Red promised were not in the game. Right down to the original trailer that said that the game would come out, quote, when it's ready. The irony in that. But many other features promised were just not in the game. Look back at that 40-minute gameplay showcase. If you played a drinking game with every feature in the showcase that ended up being MIA in the final game, or at least in the launch game, you'll be in a coma for 2 weeks minimum. Features like being able to follow an NPC's activity, being able to pick your character's detailed backstory and who they look up to, a fleshed out wanted system. Life paths ended up not making that much of a difference really, and sure, a lot of this was technically in trailers, so it probably goes against what I said earlier, but A, it was in a showcase where you had the devs telling you what's gonna be in the game, and B, even if none of that should count, I think the fact that CDPR said that Cyberpunk would come out when it's ready, and even saying that the game has gone gold, when in reality it wasn't even close, should be enough to add it to the list. I talked earlier about Microsoft lying about investing more into Tango and not shutting down Arcane Austin, but truth be told, their reputation hasn't really been the best since the reveal of the Xbox One. Sure, the Xbox One's reveal was controversial to say the least, but Microsoft lied about a lot when it comes to the console. First off, there was the whole thing about the Kinect. The Kinect was a big release and a big thing for the 360, so the Xbox One had it, but because it just wouldn't work, Microsoft removed the Kinect from the Xbox One bundles and pretty much phased it out completely, despite saying that the Kinect is an integral part of the Xbox One. So the lie is that if you're able to just completely phase it out, it's not that integral now, is it? But then also when the console was revealed, Microsoft had a bizarre approach to DRM, or digital rights management. On top of that, they made it very difficult to have people just trade games, and they stated that they couldn't reverse these features because apparently the console was built to have them from the start, even claiming it's not as simple as just flipping a switch to remove them. However, a week later, Microsoft did exactly that and removed these features. I wouldn't quite say that Xbox is dying or anything like that, because I feel like that's a bit overblown, but if you want to say that their reputation never really recovered from this, I can't argue.
What kind of pencil do we take again?
Number 2. Take a number 2.
Looks like you took a big number 2.
No Man's Sky. You knew this was coming. I feel like I mentioned this game a lot on lists like this, but it really was a shit show. This comes down to the game's director, Sean Murray, pretty much promising the whole world. A world of lies. One major lie that many people point out is how Sean Murray said that 2 players can run into each other, but since it's such a huge world, it's incredibly unlikely. But if it does happen, it's truly special. So when the game launched, 2 players streamed the game separately and just happened to run into each other, like pretty easily. And nothing special happened. Sean Murray did at one point say that the game is not a multiplayer game, so don't be expecting multiplayer stuff. The problem is, after the game went gold, you could notice a sticker on the box of the game that covers a note that says the game has multiplayer. So what's going on here? On top of that, other multiplayer features promised were not in the game, and the massive size of the planets over-exaggerated to say the least. After this whole debacle, Sean Murray and Hello Games promised to turn the game around with a series of updates over the next number of years, and to their credit, that was the one promise they were able to keep.
I'm a Luigi, number 1.
Peter Molyneux. This man. He is number 1. Every time this man opens his mouth, nothing true comes out. If you don't know, Peter Molyneux is the founder of Lionhead Studios, who were best known as the developers of the Fable series. Despite those games actually being held in such high regard, Peter Molyneux overhyped the shit out of them. He promised many features that ended up not being in the games, most notably a dynamic world that would change depending on whatever action the player makes, and your character becomes more and more famous within the world. Obviously, this ended up not happening. But even beyond the Fable series, there was Project Milo, a new game shown for the Xbox Kinect that Molyneux was behind, whereby using the Kinect, you interact with an AI named Milo, who would, interact with you in real time. But despite him claiming that this is a brand new project, it ended up just being nothing more than a tech demo for the Kinect. But then after a little while, Peter Molyneux left Lionhead and Microsoft to work on a new game called Goddess. It was funded through Kickstarter, but many of the promised features were not implemented. And that's much worse when people actually financially back the project. And even then, many people who backed the project on Kickstarter never received their rewards. Then, Peter Molyneux announced a new game called Moat, which he stated was set in the world of Albion, which is the world in Fable, which he does not have the rights to. That one isn't really much of a lie, but it is a lawsuit waiting to happen. I could honestly keep going about Peter Molyneux, and this actually could have been an entire list of lies that he's told. So with that being said, everything that Peter Molyneux says comes in at number 1. So, yeah, that's my list. Honestly, I'm being honest with you, that is my list. Do you guys agree with the list, not agree with the list? Don't lie to me! Anyways, be sure to subscribe, or I will never be honest with you ever again.